What if the end of the world didn't come with an explosion, but a drought?
Long before modern climate change made headlines, entire empires had already risen and fallen because of it. Not with tanks or plagues, but with empty skies, dry rivers, and failing crops. No storms of steel, just the silence of a land that could no longer feed its people.
In the ancient world, climate wasn't just background, it was the stage, the director, and sometimes, the executioner. The mighty Akkadian Empire, gone. The brilliant Maya, scattered. The mysterious Indus Valley, faded into history. What did they all have in common?
They were all brought low by changes in the earth itself. Imagine building pyramids, cities, and calendars more advanced than anything in Europe only to be undone by the weather. From volcanic winters that blocked the sun for years to megadroughts that dried entire regions, the past is filled with warnings.
And those warnings are more relevant now than ever. Because history doesn't just repeat, it whispers. This is not just a story about ancient civilizations. It's a story about us. Our world. And what we might become if we fail to listen. A journey through ruins, relics, and records that reveal what climate once did to the great powers of the world and what it might do again. The story of climate and collapse doesn't begin in modern times. It begins in ancient Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Around 2334 BCE, a man named Sargon of Akkad united the independent city-states of Sumer under one powerful banner. This was the birth of the Akkadian Empire, the world's first empire in recorded history. Sargon was not only a conqueror, he was a visionary. He built roads, standardized trade, and even spread a common language across Mesopotamia. The empire stretched from the Persian Gulf in the south to the Mediterranean in the north, an unprecedented feat. For nearly a century, the Akkadians thrived. Cities expanded. Trade routes flourished. Art, literature, and science blossomed. But like so many civilizations, their success depended on one critical resource: water. Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, relied heavily on those rivers for irrigation, agriculture, and life itself. Then, something began to shift. Slowly, then suddenly. Around 2200 BCE, signs of climate disruption began to appear. Crops withered. River levels dropped. Dust storms grew more frequent.
Archaeologists call this period the 4.2 kilo-year event, a severe, multi-century megadrought that affected large parts of the ancient world.
Sediment cores taken from the region show layers of wind-blown dust, signaling years, decades, of dry, desolate conditions.
Winds from the north shifted, cutting off the rains that once nourished the Akkadian heartland.
With the rivers low and rainfall absent, agriculture collapsed. The empire's breadbasket turned to dust.
And with failed crops came famine.
Hunger turned people desperate. Desperation led to unrest.
Cities that once teemed with people became ghost towns.
Fields lay fallow. Canals dried. Livestock died. Refugees flooded into cities seeking food, safety, water, anything.
But the empire, stretched to its limits, could not respond.
The system buckled under the pressure.
To make matters worse, border regions saw invasions and rebellions. The Akkadians, a mountain people, raided from the northeast.
The Akkadian army, once invincible, found itself overwhelmed by both internal chaos and external threats.
By 2150 BCE, the empire collapsed completely. The great capital of Akkad was abandoned. Its walls crumbled into the earth. Clay tablets written after the fall tell a haunting story. For the first time, the north wind blew, the fields were barren, the gods turned away. To the Akkadians, the collapse wasn't environmental, it was divine punishment. To us, it's one of the clearest early examples of climate-driven societal failure. This wasn't just a drought. It was a systemic breakdown triggered by environmental stress, a domino effect of climate, economy, society, and power. What makes the Akkadian collapse so important is how early it occurred over 4,000 years ago, and how modern the pattern feels. Rising complexity. Overdependence on infrastructure. Fragile trade routes. A sudden environmental shift. And then, collapse. The evidence isn't just in the soil. It's in the stories that followed. Later Mesopotamian cultures remembered Akkad as a cautionary tale. They spoke of a golden age lost, a great city swallowed by dust, a world punished for pride and neglect. Today, archaeologists walk the same dry ground. They study the layers. They read the warning signs still visible thousands of years later. The Akkadian Empire reminds us that no matter how mighty a civilization may seem, it is always vulnerable to forces greater than itself, especially the climate it depends on. This segment explores the profound relationship between the ancient Maya and climate, especially drought. Deep in the rainforests of Mesoamerica, the ancient Maya carved out a world of kings, gods, stars, and stone. They built towering pyramids in places like Tikal, Palenque, and Copan, cities that rose from jungle and stretched toward the heavens. The Maya civilization wasn't a single empire, but a constellation of city-states, each with its own ruler, calendar, and rituals. Despite political fragmentation, they shared a common worldview, one centered around time, cycles, and the cosmos. Maya priests, known as Ajkayawan, were skywatchers, astronomer priests who recorded eclipses, tracked Venus, and forecast seasonal changes. To them, the sky was not just a dome of stars. It was a divine calendar. A prophecy. A mirror of human fate. Their calendar system was remarkably advanced, combining a 260-day sacred cycle, Sokin, a 365-day solar cycle, Hab, and a vast chronology known as the Long Count. With it, the Maya could calculate lunar phases, solar years, planetary alignments, and even predict celestial events centuries in advance. The Dresden Codex, one of the only surviving Maya books, includes a Venus table accurate to within a single day over 500 years. Their scientific knowledge, however, was deeply tied to religion and power. Kings claimed divine right based on celestial signs. For the Maya, the heavens governed the earth. Crops were planted with Venus. Wars were timed with eclipses. Coronations were held under auspicious skies. Their cities were laid out to align with solstices and equinoxes. Observatories like El Caracol in Chichen Itza tracked the sun's movements precisely. But for all their brilliance, the Maya were still tied to one fragile resource, rainwater. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, the Maya heartland had no major rivers. They depended on seasonal rains and limestone reservoirs called chultans. A few years of missed rainfall could mean famine. A decade could mean collapse. Around the year 800 CE, the skies began to change. Evidence from lake sediments, cave formations, and coral reefs reveals a series of severe droughts that struck the Maya lowlands between 800 and 1000 CE. Tree rings across the Yucatan show stunted growth. Sediment layers show rapid lake evaporation. Rainfall decreased by as much as 40%. The rains, once rhythmic and sacred, became erratic. The skies went silent. And the consequences were devastating. Crop yields plummeted. Maize, the sacred staple, failed across the region. Food shortages led to malnutrition, disease, and unrest. Cities once filled with tens of thousands were emptied in waves. The Great Pyramids stood watch over abandoned plazas. Warfare increased. Carvings show city-states battling each other, vying for dwindling resources and sacrificial captives. Royal monuments became fewer and smaller, a sign of lost power and prestige. The kings, who once promised divine order through celestial knowledge, now faced questions they couldn't answer. When the rains failed, it wasn't just nature that broke. It was belief. Rituals became more desperate. Archaeological evidence suggests a rise in human sacrifice during periods of extreme drought. They turned to the gods, to the sky, to fire and blood, hoping to restore balance. But the rain never came. The collapse was not sudden, but regional and drawn out. Different cities fell at different times, some slowly, some violently. By 900 CE, most of the major classic Maya cities in the southern lowlands were abandoned. The people didn't vanish, but they moved. They dispersed north, to places like Uxmal and Chichen Itza, where water was more stable. Still, the classic Maya world, the high age of stele, astronomy, and powerful kings, was over. In the centuries that followed, Maya civilization continued in altered forms. But the glory of Tikal and Köppen faded into jungle and myth. To modern archaeologists, the Maya collapse is one of the most striking examples of how environmental change and social complexity can become a dangerous mix. Their fall wasn't caused by drought alone, but drought was the final blow in a fragile, interdependent system. They had mastered time, but were at the mercy of climate. And yet, their knowledge survives. Modern researchers still use Mayan calculations to verify astronomical models. The calendar systems remain a marvel of math and myth. Today, indigenous Maya communities in Guatemala, Belize, and southern Mexico still follow the Tzolk'in and mark ceremonies by ancient rhythms. Their resilience speaks not only to survival but to a culture that, despite collapse, never truly disappeared. The story of the Maya is a warning, but also a wonder. A reminder that even the most advanced civilizations can be fragile when the skies go silent. In the vast plains of modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, a forgotten civilization once flourished beside ancient rivers. We call it the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the world's earliest urban cultures, yet also one of its most mysterious. From around 2600 to 1900 BCE, the people of the Indus built sprawling cities with wide streets, granaries, workshops, and sewer systems more advanced than anything in Europe for thousands of years. Cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro weren't just populated, they were planned. No central palaces, no giant statues, no war monuments, just cleanliness, order, and an obsession with flow of water, goods, and life. They standardized bricks across hundreds of miles. They created weights and measures that were nearly uniform. They even had toilets with running water. And yet, for all their advancement, the Indus people left behind no Rosetta Stone, no readable texts. Only symbols and clues. Archaeologists still can't fully decipher their script. We don't even know what they called themselves. But we know this: they were peaceful, organized, and deeply connected to the rhythms of water. Their cities were built along rivers, especially one now lost to time, the Ghaggar Hakra, believed by many to be the legendary Sarasvati River mentioned in ancient Indian texts. So what happened to this great, clean, quiet civilization? Unlike the dramatic downfall of the Akkadians or Maya, the Indus decline was subtle, drawn out over centuries. There is little evidence of widespread war or conquest. No burn layers. No signs of mass burial or famine. Instead, their decline looks like a fading. Around 1900 BCE, signs of stress appear, urban planning weakens, trade declines, bricks become irregular, writing disappears from pottery. Over the next 300 years, many major cities were gradually abandoned. But the question remains, why? The answer, as scientists now believe, lies in the climate and in the rivers. Paleoclimate data shows a significant shift around the same time. The monsoon weakened. Rains that once fed rivers and crops began to falter. The mighty Gagar Hakra began to dry up. Once lush floodplains turned to arid plains. The rhythm of life was broken. Without reliable rainfall, agriculture suffered. And with it, the complex urban web that depended on stable harvests. The Indus people may have tried to adapt, moving toward smaller villages closer to the Ganges River, where water remained more dependable. But their urban way of life, the dense cities, advanced engineering, far-reaching trade, became unsustainable. Instead of a sudden crash, the Indus world experienced what historians call a durbanization. People didn't vanish. They simply changed how they lived. Cities emptied. Rural settlements rose. The centralized systems dissolved. The culture scattered into smaller, less complex societies that archaeologists are only beginning to understand. Even more intriguing, some scholars suggest tectonic shifts may have altered river paths, further complicating agriculture and trade. Rivers that once supported life simply moved away. Without rivers, the cities lost their lifeblood. It's hard to overstate how dependent the Indus people were on seasonal water cycles. Their economy, agriculture, even religion likely revolved around them. And when those cycles shifted, so did civilization. Unlike the violent epics of other ancient cultures, the Indus Valley left us no poems of war, no kings of conquest, no divine warnings. Instead, they left behind drains and bricks. Quiet. Functional. Unassuming. But that silence speaks volumes. It tells us that not all collapses happen in fire and fury. Some happen in dust, in silence, in a slow migration of people seeking better lands. Today, the bones of their cities lie buried under modern farms and towns, still revealing secrets with every excavation. Satellite imagery has helped researchers rediscover ancient riverbeds and dried canals, confirming the extent of water's disappearance. The lesson? Even the most advanced systems, no matter how peaceful or efficient, are vulnerable to climate and ecology. The Indus Valley didn't fall because of bad rulers or invasions. It fell because its environment changed faster than it could adapt. And that makes it one of the most relevant stories for our own time. Because sometimes, the most dangerous enemy isn't war or rebellion, it's a sky that stops raining, and a river that forgets how to flow. This segment explores how sudden, global-scale climate events, such as massive volcanic eruptions and periods of cooling, triggered societal disruptions and collapses throughout history. Not all climate disasters are slow. Some arrive overnight, with no warning. Sometimes, it isn't the rivers that fail or the monsoon that falters, but the sky itself that goes dark. Volcanic eruptions are Earth's most dramatic way of changing the climate and history. When a massive volcano erupts, it can eject millions of tons of sulfur dioxide and ash into the upper atmosphere. There, the particles form reflective aerosols that block sunlight, cooling the planet for years. It's not just local destruction, it's global disruption, capable of altering rainfall, shortening growing seasons, and changing wind patterns. One of the most powerful and mysterious of these events occurred in 536 CE. Historical accounts from across the world all describe the same thing: a sun that dimmed, crops that failed, and societies that struggled to survive. In Constantinople, Byzantine historians wrote of a year with no summer, where the sun gave no light as the moon. In Ireland, the annals recorded a failure of bread from 536 to 539. China, too, recorded widespread frost and famine. Tree rings from Europe and North America confirm the story: a sudden, sharp drop in temperature, the coldest decade in 2,000 years. Scientists now believe that a cataclysmic volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland or North America, caused the atmospheric haze. A second eruption, in 540 CE, made things worse, triggering what became known as the Late Antique Little Ice Age.
This wasn't just an environmental problem, it triggered a cascading crisis across continents. In the Eastern Roman Empire, weakened by famine and economic strain, the first waves of the Justinian plague erupted.
The plague killed millions and destabilized what was once the world's most powerful empire.
In Mesoamerica, this same period shows signs of drought, migration, and upheaval, possibly linked to the global cooling event.
Further east, in China and Korea, written records describe snow in summer, failed harvests, and mass starvation. It was a global shock caused by one volcanic event that no one saw coming. And it wasn't the last. In 1257 CE, the Samalas eruption in Indonesia erupted with a force twice as powerful as Krakatoa. It threw ash and gases high into the stratosphere, disrupting the climate for years. Tree rings show narrow growth across the globe, especially in the northern hemisphere, confirming a global temperature drop. Europe saw flooding, famines, and failed harvests.
In the Americas, drought hit the ancestral Puebloan, Anasazi, communities of the Southwest.
Less than a century later, around 1300, the world slipped into the Little Ice Age, a centuries-long period of cooler temperatures. In Europe, this meant shorter growing seasons, harsh winters, and food insecurity. Rivers like the Thames froze. Alpine glaciers advanced.
Entire villages were swallowed by ice. Famines became more frequent.
Between 1315 and 1317, the Great Famine killed millions across Europe.
Grain prices soared. Livestock died.
Cannibalism and infanticide were recorded in desperate regions.
And then, as if nature hadn't done enough, the Black Death arrived in 1347.
Weakened by hunger and climate instability, the population of Europe had no defense against the plague. Some historians argue that the climate disruptions of the Little Ice Age helped pave the way for the end of feudalism and the rise of modern Europe. In North America, the ancestral Puebloans, once known for their cliff dwellings and complex society, abandoned many of their settlements during this time.
Prolonged droughts, possibly linked to global cooling patterns, pushed them to migrate and restructure their way of life.
Across the globe, in the Andes, the Tiwanaku civilization around Lake Titicaca also declined in the same window, coinciding with glacial advances and shifts in rainfall. These were not isolated collapses. They were threads in a single, global fabric of climate change.
And many were tied to the sudden cooling events triggered by volcanic eruptions or prolonged solar minimums.
What connects these stories isn't just climate, but the inability of societies to adapt fast enough to abrupt environmental shocks. Civilizations built for stability, suddenly facing years without sunlight, rainfall, or food, often couldn't withstand the strain. They remind us that the Earth doesn't just shape empires slowly, sometimes, it reshapes them in the blink of a smoky, sunless sky. When we look back at ancient civilizations, the Akkadians, the Maya, the Indus, or medieval Europe, we're not just studying ruins.
We're seeing reflections.
Their collapses were not only caused by war or political failure. Often, it was the climate, a silent, invisible force that shifted everything. Today, we face a similar reality.
But this time, we're not dealing with a single river or a failing monsoon. We're facing a planet-wide transformation. In ancient times, the triggers were droughts, cooling periods, volcanic eruptions, natural events. Now, we are the trigger.
Burning fossil fuels, deforestation, industrial agriculture all have released greenhouse gases that are trapping heat and destabilizing Earth's climate systems. But like ancient civilizations, we're also deeply vulnerable to these changes, especially in the areas we often take for granted: food, water, and stability.
Drought is already impacting agriculture from California to the Sahel. Glaciers are retreating. Rivers are drying.
just like in the Indus Valley.
Coastal cities, from Jakarta to Miami, now face rising seas, much like how ancient cities faced desertification or shifting rivers.
And our interdependence, our globalized economy, makes us more connected, but also more fragile.
A drought in one region can cause food shortages across the globe. We have satellites, sensors, AI forecasting, and more data than any society in history.
Yet often, we still fail to act until it's too late. Ancient civilizations were often taken by surprise.
The rain stopped.
The crops failed. The people starved. They lacked warning systems. We don't.
And yet, our response is eerily familiar: denial, delay, blaming the gods or each other.
The Maya conducted more rituals.
The Akkadians built more canals. We build more carbon pipelines.
We know the science. We know the risks. But systemic change remains slow. That's the haunting echo of the past. Like the Maya, we rely on complex systems that appear invincible until they're not. Like the Indus people, we're organized and advanced. But advancement does not equal immunity from nature. We're told that modern technology will save us.
But history shows that technology without foresight is not protection, it's illusion.
The difference today is scale.
In the past, one region suffered.
Now, the entire planet is vulnerable. But there's another difference: hope.
We have the knowledge, the means, and the tools to avoid the fate of the civilizations that came before us.
The question is no longer can we learn from history? It's will we listen before we become history ourselves? History isn't just about what happened, it's about what keeps happening. And climate change has been a relentless, invisible player through it all. From Akkad's collapse to the Maya's migration, from the Indus fading to volcanoes blotting out the sun, the lesson is simple: climate matters.
It doesn't matter how advanced your cities are, how powerful your rulers, or how precise your calendars, if the skies stop raining, everything changes. These ancient civilizations didn't have fossil fuels, airplanes, or megacities, but they still fell to environmental shifts they couldn't control or adapt to.
We have far more information, technology, and tools. But are we any wiser? The warning signs are flashing all around us: melting glaciers, rising seas, dried lakes, record heat waves.
And yet, many nations still debate the basic reality of climate change, just as ancient rulers clung to rituals when action was needed.
We must remember that the Earth doesn't wait for politics. It responds to balance and imbalance. The Maya couldn't stop the drought.
The Akkadians couldn't reverse the winds.
The Indus couldn't bring back the rivers.
But we can slow the pace of change.
We can mitigate the damage. We can plan. Sustainability isn't a trend. It's survival. And ancient history is the clearest blueprint we have.
The civilizations that lasted longest weren't the ones with the most conquest or wealth, they were the ones that adapted. They shifted crops, moved cities, diversified trade routes.
And when they didn't, they vanished. We live in cities built on coastlines, reliant on massive agricultural belts, dependent on global supply chains. A drought in one country. A flood in another. A wildfire. A failed monsoon. These aren't isolated events, they ripple outward, fast.
Ancient societies didn't fully understand the science, but they felt the consequences.
We understand the science, and we're still waiting. The hard truth is this: no civilization in history has ever faced a challenge this global, this urgent, and this avoidable. We can't say we weren't warned. Not just by scientists, but by the ruins beneath our feet.
The Maya left stone pyramids and starlit calendars.
The Akkadians left clay tablets full of famine prayers. The Indus left sewer systems buried beneath modern streets. All of them whisper the same thing: pay attention. Our challenge is no longer understanding the problem, it's mustering the collective will to change course. To think beyond quarterly profits and election cycles. To build for the future, not just the present. To treat water as sacred. To treat food systems as fragile. To treat energy choices as moral ones. What we call progress means nothing if it cannot last. We need to redesign how we live, how we grow, how we consume, how we build, how we think. And that starts not with technology, but with values. Values rooted in humility before nature, resilience in planning, and wisdom in remembering what came before. The earth has always changed. The question is, will we change with it, or collapse like those who didn't? Because climate change is no longer a distant storm. It's here. It's accelerating. And it's coming for everything we take for granted. This is not alarmism. It's archaeology. And now, as we close this journey through the past, ask yourself, what would the ruins of our civilization say? If someone unearthed our cities 1,000 years from now, what story would the layers of concrete and carbon tell? Would they find a society that saw the signs, ignored them, and crumbled? Or one that rose to the challenge and chose survival over convenience? The fate of past civilizations was sealed by droughts, by eruptions, by skies that stopped raining. Ours could be sealed by inaction, but that's not the only ending. We can still choose adaptation, restoration, justice, innovation, empathy. We can learn not just from the past, but for it, because history is not a warning. It's an invitation to be better. If this story moved you, share it. Share it with someone who thinks history is just about dates and kings. Let them know that buried under the ground are answers to questions we haven't even fully asked. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the forgotten truths of the past.